Welcome to Cultimatum, the podcast that delves deep into the culture of complexities of cults and human trafficking. I'm your host, Anonymous Andrew. Each week, we explore different facets of cult life and human trafficking, from the psychological manipulation to the brave stories of those who have escaped.
Hello, everyone. I'm Melody. I'm Andrew's co-host. Having experienced the depth of a cult firsthand, specifically the House of Yahweh, I'm here as an advocate for fellow survivors. My journey has inspired me to help others who find themselves in similar situations. This podcast is committed to respecting our guests' privacy. To ensure their comfort and safety, we offer them the option to remain anonymous.
Additionally, we would like to include a disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by our hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Cultimatum or its affiliates. Cultimatum is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information shared by our hosts and guests. The content discussed on this podcast is based on personal experiences, opinions, and speculation, and should not be construed as professional services or advice. Neither the host nor the guest are assuming liability for any misuse or reliance on the information presented. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and listeners are encouraged to conduct their own research and seek professional advice where appropriate.
Before we dive into today's episode, we want to issue a trigger warning. Some episodes may explore explicit and potentially disturbing topics such as sexual abuse, rape, human trafficking, suicide, and other sensitive subjects. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Cultimatum Podcast, the culture of cults. And my name is Anonymous Andrew, and with me tonight is my co-host, Melody. Hi, Melody.
Hi, Andrew. We have an interesting treat for our audience today. We have a guest from a brand new group that we've never heard of before. It's called the ICOC, which is the International Church of Christ. Her name is Justine for Justice. That is the name she goes by on social media. She is a survivor and an activist, and she is here to tell us her story and explain to us a little bit more about the ICOC. Welcome to the show, Justine.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I'm stoked because, we've done 25 episodes and we've done many cults, but some of them have been repeats, but we like a new one. We like to get a new, fresh cult in there. And ICOC sounds like it fits the bill. So let's...
Yeah.
So take us from wherever you want to start.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what I'll start with is just so to give your listeners a little bit of an idea of how the ICOC came to be. It is sort of an offshoot of the mainline churches of Christ. So they were very brilliant by using a very innocuous name. It doesn't sound culty, right?
Right.
The other important thing to note is that at this time, there are actually two cults, but from the same beginning. In 2003, there was, for us, this is a really big deal. This is like the equivalent of that feeling you have about 9/11? Like it was like before 9/11 and after 9/11. For us, we have the letter. It's the Henry Crete letter. This man wrote a letter, like an open letter to the church, and it ended up kind of dismantling it for a while and creating some changes, not enough. And so now there are two cults. And again, I am going to use the word cult. I know not everybody loves it, and some people prefer high control group. However, I do believe that the ICOC and the ICC are both cults, and so that's why I use that language.
And Justine, the name of the podcast is Cultimatum, and it's all about cults and human trafficking. So we will use the word cult.
Wonderful. Okay.
What's the other word that they say they use? Hyper what?
High control groups.
High control. That's to me, that sounds like a politically correct way of saying cult. And
yeah,
it's like dancing around the subject. It's a cult.
It is, and I think that the reason that we try in some ways to use different language is to not alienate people, especially people who are in these groups, because we do ultimately want them to leave and we want them to be free. And then sometimes when you say trigger words like cult, then people are like, well, I'm not going to listen to you. And so that's why I think that's a really big reason why it comes up.
Okay.
Oh, I think you're right, Justine,
But
because
today
it took me years
about
to
the
call
cult.
my group a cult. It took me years to get to that point. Yeah.
Oh, so you totally understand. Like that's a
Yes.
hard thing because it sounds so aggressive and insulting. But the thing is that these
Yes.
are, and so this is absolutely, it fits the bill. You go down the list of what is a cult, and the ICOC and the ICC, they both fit the bill. How did I get here?
Yeah.
Okay.
How did you get
Yes.
here?
Yes.
So I was 3 years old when my dad joined. Actually, technically, my mother joined first and then brought my dad into it. My dad was very newly sober at the time. He's 40 years sober now, but at the time, he was newly sober. He basically was a single dad, and he found a community that embraced him and supported him and had structure, and it really was kind of like the perfect fit for him at the time. My dad never did lose his connection with AA. I know that you can relate to that. He still, I think that might have been some of his saving grace when we were marked in disfellowship. So my dad joined sort of out of like looking for community. He's looking for God. He said that when he was growing up, every time, like, they went to church every Sunday, but like would fight the whole way to church and then have to pretend to like smile and pretend to be happy the whole time at church. And he felt like the ICOC was different. It was a place where people seemed really genuine. There was definitely a lot of love bombing. And this would have been in like 1990 because I was about 3 years old. Now, how am I here though, is I started speaking out about my experience when I had a 3-year-old. I think that, like, psychologically speaking, having a 3-year-old, it reminded me of maybe me being 3, or just kind of horrified me maybe about, like, I would never let my 3-year-old go through the things that I went through. And so I started speaking out. And by speaking out, I mean, at the time I had a blog, and I just started blogging about the very not good experiences that I had, including, so we should probably mention that there should be a trigger warning here. So there was sexual abuse, there was a lot of spiritual abuse, and I started sharing about it because I knew that it was wrong and I would never raise a child in this. And it ended up sort of blowing up. A lot of people started reading my little teeny tiny silly blog, and a lot of people started reaching out to me saying, like, you're not the only one. I also experienced this. And some people said, will you share my story? So I started doing that. And this was about 11 years ago. And over time, I just started collecting stories because it was, I wanted to give, I wanted to support people. So I would just listen to them. They would tell me what they had been through, and I kind of just kept this log of the things that were still going on and the things that did go on. But the church was very, very upset about it. You know, they did the whole thing where they just like character assassinate and slut shame and all of those things. But thank goodness I did that. And also thank goodness I am as stubborn as I am, because I ended up making a Facebook group, kind of like you did, where it was like a support group for people who had been in cults, namely this one, of course, because that's what I don't know, it made me feel like so not alone to hear that other people had been through what I'd been through, or whatever their stories were. And then in, let's see, 2022, November 22, I got a phone call. And it was from Shell Rowland, and she said, I hear that you might be able to help me. We're going to file some lawsuits against the ICOC and the ICC. Do you think that maybe you have any information for us? And oh my gosh, at that time I had about 10 years of it. So that's how I became involved in the lawsuits.
Wow, you had to be stoked. Because I'm sure that's what you were hoping for, something like that to come out of all of the information you were gathering for all those years.
Oh my gosh, it was a dream come true. I thought I had to pinch myself. I mean, this is real. Finally, I thought they were, I don't know, maybe I thought they would get away with it forever. And finally, here we were. And I could finally go back to all of these people and give them the option if they wanted to. I never pressured anybody, but if they wanted to, I got to go back and say, if you would like to, you can be a part of these lawsuits and we can, get you some justice.
Wow.
Can you talk about the substance of the lawsuits?
Absolutely. So when it comes to cults, it's very difficult to take legal action. As you guys may have heard in some other cult stories, we have to focus on what is actually illegal, because it's not illegal to be in a cult. The way that the government looks at it is you're joining on your own free will, even though I don't think that's totally legitimate, but it's really hard to gauge that. So what we did do is figured out the places where these organizations had actually broken the law. That would have been in sexual abuse of minors and adults. That was in trafficking, and it was in financial fraud. So those are the ways that we've been sort of like maneuvering through. But our very first lawsuits that we're focusing on right now are all sexual abuse cases.
Okay, explain. You caught my attention with the word human trafficking. What did they explain that?
Okay, so like the cost for salvation in these organizations is of course, it is your tithe, but it's always more than 10%. And it is constant recruitment. So we were literally, since I was little tiny, we were door knocking. We were, doing like 5Ks for what was our organization at the time was called Hope Worldwide. But basically what we were doing was going out and recruiting and getting money and
let me ask you a question. You said that they would have you go out recruiting. In my mind, the first image was JW, Jehovah's Witness. So did you go door to door?
We did do, we're a little bit like that. So the idea, with JW, it's like they try to keep you really exhausted and just really, really busy. So like you almost don't have time to think. That was very much the way that it was for us. So we had been told that, it was our job to evangelize the world. And so we did. So I was a very little kid walking up to doors. I actually have a huge issue with knocking on doors, like as an adult. I'm so uncomfortable.
Me too. I don't knock on people's doors unless I'm looking for, like when I was younger, like, is my son here? But other than that, I don't knock on people's door. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's a weird. I mean, it's not weird. I think that it's always a little bit.
It's an invasion of privacy.
Right?
Unless somebody knows you're coming.
I'm not cool with soliciting. Yeah, unless somebody knows you're coming. And
right.
It was like I felt like as a child being very small, and I felt like I was being used by being placed.
You were.
Oh, absolutely. We'd be at the grocery store and like my family, who by the way totally supports what I'm doing. They're not going to be mad at me for sharing this. But they would be like, go share your faith with that one. And then I would like walk up to a random person and invite them to church. And it was just mortifying.
What did they come to church?
Sometimes. Most people were like, "Oh, thank you, honey. No, thank you."
Yeah.
But I know that my sister shared her faith with somebody who did not only start coming to church, she went through the very rigorous brainwashing studies and got baptized and got married in the church. She is no longer in it now, but she was in it for a good 20-something years.
Wow.
Okay, so you started with, I was just curious how human trafficking, you did mention that. So human trafficking is taking somebody and making them do sexual favors usually, or labor.
That was what we were doing. It was labor. Now, absolutely, were there other sexual things going on, which is why, we're working on these lawsuits. Absolutely. But mostly it was forced labor.
Free labor, like they would have to work for free.
Yes, we did not get paid for all of everything, all of the energy that we put in. And it was constant, especially like I would say if as you continue down this rabbit hole and assuming anybody maybe who was around during that was in like the campus ministry, I mean, they got zero rest. It was, you were in school, but they didn't actually want you to complete school. They just wanted you to be there so you could be recruiting. And it was boom, boom, boom. You've got to do this, and you've got to be here, and you've got to be at church 40 times a week. And then we're going to be building this for this person. And you're going to, oh, so-and-so's having a wedding. So guess what? You're doing the dresses, and you're doing the bouquets, and you're doing this. And nobody got paid for any of that, but everybody came together and had to. And if you didn't and you had like a bad attitude about it, then you would be rebuked and humiliated.
Was there a quota that you had to, so if they sent you out on a weekend or Saturday, Sunday, did you have to come back with, I found 5 members that would come?
Yes. There were always lists, particularly in what were the leaders meetings. So of course I never was a part of the leaders meetings because I was a teen when I finally was marked and disfellowshipped. But in leaders meetings, they had their own lists, and they had lists for everybody that was under them. It was kind of a pyramid scheme. So it was like there was the high ups, and then everybody underneath had people that they sort of managed. They're like a handler. We call them disciplers, but it's basically your handler. And then your handler makes sure that you're going out a certain amount of time, making sure that you're tithing a certain amount, making sure that you're bringing a certain amount of people to church. And when you don't, then they're responsible to get that money from you somehow. So you would be like pressured into selling your television or your wedding ring.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really intense.
Wow.
It's wild, like, when I talk about it, because it almost is like, how could this be? But when it was just this perfect storm, I guess, the way that they bring you in and love bomb you. And my parents did not think anything of it at all.
Right.
I did. I thought it was weird, but I can't explain myself. I was always a questioner.
So when people leave and they decide they want to get out, do they shun people? Are you not allowed to talk to people who have left if you're still in?
Yes. Particularly back then, it was very difficult to leave. They wouldn't have made it easy. They would show up at your house, call, text. They definitely don't want you to leave. Now, That being said, in my experience with my parents, it was just after that letter that I mentioned earlier, the Henry Creek letter, and things were a little bit weird. So they only ever sent people to my parents' house once, but my parents had already been marked and disfellowshipped. So the reason my parents were marked and disfellowshipped, which meant to be shunned, so my dad says that one day he had 300 friends and the next day he had 2.
Right.
Literally, it was like dead silence. We no longer had a relationship with the people in our congregation. And these are the people I've known my whole life. I literally thought that these people were really my family, because that's the way that cults work. They were my family. I still, to this day, have issues with, like, I kind of love them, and then I find out the things that some of them have done, and here we are, taking these people to court. But I used to sleep over at their house. It's really uncomfortable.
Right.
In doing research before you came on, I went to an AI website that, I might as well say it, it's Perplexity. And Perplexity, you can ask questions, and it's unlike ChatGPT and the other ones. It actually goes out on the internet and finds information and organizes it. So I asked this what ICOC was and why were they considered a cult. And it came back, and I'm reading it, and so far 3 things that you have said are listed here. Love bombing, the pyramid scheme is listed here. So you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about strict social separation. So did they keep you isolated from the rest of society? Were you allowed to have cell phones? Were you allowed to go to the movies? Were you allowed to socialize with people outside the cult?
Well, cell phones just became into existence at that time.
Right.
So that wasn't the same as it is. We didn't have social media when I was that age. I did go to a regular school, like a public school, but I was told from the youngest age that everybody at school was going to go to hell, and that I felt a very, very deep conviction and responsibility for everybody, my teachers, everybody. I felt like I was supposed to bring them to church so that they wouldn't go to hell. It was really difficult for me. I'm a pretty empathetic human being, and we weren't allowed to just like spend time with people outside of the church. Occasionally we did get to go on vacation in the early days. We got to go like to visit my parents' families, but as I got older, I would be guilted about it. We were never allowed to go to another church, though. Absolutely not. When we went to like visit my stepmom's family in the Bay Area, we went to an ICOC church.
Were you allowed to, like, if your family had like a wedding or a funeral, were you allowed to go into another church for those kind of services?
I would say that yes, although we did not have a lot of friends or family outside of it. So
okay, so the opportunity didn't come up.
The opportunity didn't come up, but there definitely would have. Like the one time I can remember was we did go to a Catholic wedding once, and they were like our one friends, like friends of my parents who had kids that were our age, who were outside of the church. And before going, my parents did have like a very serious talk with us about how this is not the way that we believe.
Okay.
So we were really prepared going in that this is not what we believe. What they're saying isn't biblical, even though it turns out that's not the truth.
Right.
At some point, Melody and I are going to sit down and make a list of criteria. So I went to AI and asked about what a cult is, but Melody and I we're going to do a whole episode on what is a cult, what criteria makes a cult. So doing these past 25 interviews, we're starting, Melody's more familiar with them than I am, but I'm starting to see a pattern. So for example, if you got sick, were you allowed to go to the hospital?
Yes.
So there were no restrictions there.
Yeah, no. My cousins grew up in a different cult that did not allow for any of that. That was, interestingly, if we have a lot of cults in our family, but no, ours, we were allowed to go to a hospital.
Okay.
We were allowed to take medicine and have vaccines. It wasn't, so I want to say like the social restriction was even like confused us, because we're not supposed to be yoked with unbelievers, which usually is used in marriage, but they would actually use it in friendship too. Like if I made a friend at school, they'd be like, they're going to hell. So basically you don't love them enough if you're not bringing them here. And if you're not bringing them here, then you can't spend time with them. It was very, they just made you feel, okay, here's a great example. My birth mother, I had to write her a letter telling her that I could not be in her life because she wasn't a disciple.
Oh, yeah, that's socially isolating
bizarre.
you, and that's from
And my mom had other kids, which meant that meant that I wasn't around them. I was not the only one. Like my other friends, all of us who had parents who were not disciples, we were guilted in a very different way because, we have this loyalty and love for our parents, but we were really, really, like, the word I want to use is rebuked. We were just like rebuked so hard to the point where we just were like, okay, well, I guess I can't be in their life. And then also this was a tactic. It wasn't just to keep us away from them. It was also a tactic to try to force them to be a part of our group. Do you love me enough to join, to go to heaven or whatever? And I'm so young that I don't really fully understand what I'm asking. But I also have been brainwashed since I was 3 years old. So I'm saying I'm regurgitating, right?
Right.
You had mentioned that you would, when you were out recruiting, and I don't know if you would tell, so if you walked up to me on the street and I said, no, I'm not interested, you said that people that wouldn't join, I may be paraphrasing, would go to hell, right?
I wouldn't have told you that, though.
Okay. Did they tell you that if you left ICOC, you would go to hell?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's a cult.
Not only would I go to hell, it was probably going to become a drug addict and become a stripper and get pregnant and have an abortion, like you name it. Every
Your
dad
life would go downhill, go down the
Yeah.
rabbit hole quickly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was very scary. They talked about it a lot. This was something that was very uncomfortable, and I realized it so much more as a mother, as a parent, and I don't think I fully understand it. Was so I grew up in the rooms of AA as much as I grew up in this church. And so I was a very confused kid with, like, I actually thought drinking was a sin, because I just confused it all. But I would hear people share so vulnerably in AA. They would, share about what their life was before they got help, before they got sober. But the same thing was happening at church, which was why I think part of the reason my dad really felt connected to it, because during communion, they would bring people up on stage and they would have to share very, very vulnerably and very embarrassing things. Like sometimes, like if you like cheated on your wife, they would make you go on stage and share that you did in front of the whole congregation. And like, you'd have to be broken and cry and all of these things. But then that's when they'd bring out the whole, like, yeah, you nailed Jesus to the cross with your sin, but now you're repenting. And so all of us are going to like drink this juice and eat this cracker and ruminate on the ways that we've been nailing Jesus to the cross in our sin. But they would also have men like who would talk about like sexual sin. And I'm I'm as little as 11 years old, remembering listening to men talking about sexual sin and watching everybody just like eating it up. It was weird. It was like this weird pornography thing that people wanted to hear all the time. It wasn't like, I don't know. It was just really awkward.
No,
that is weird. I mean, go ahead.
In AA, you don't have to get up and tell your sins. Matter of fact, that's supposed to be private between you and your sponsor. Let me ask you, can I talk about your dad for a second and what you told me before? Mm-hmm. Okay, so your dad has 40 years sober and he got into AA and then he joined ICOC. So for those who may not familiar with the 12 steps, you are supposed to find a higher power, a power greater than yourself. And many people call AA a cult, because they say you have to follow God, but it's not. It's a higher power of your understanding. Do you think your dad went to ICOC because maybe he didn't have a higher power and he wanted to find?
I think my dad hadn't. I don't think that people join cults. I think that they join movements.
Oh, yeah. No, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to join a cult today. Yeah. They join religious organizations.
I think what it is, Andrew, is when you're in that position, that is a vulnerability. When you're trying to get sober, you're vulnerable. And it is one of the vulnerabilities that cults can latch onto to suck you in. And I'm sure your dad was vulnerable at that time. He was trying to get his life together. He was trying to make better choices. And I'm sure, felt like this was a better choice. And I'm sure he was love bombed and encouraged when he walked in there. And he was made to feel even more like he was in the right place, doing the right thing for the right reasons.
My dad wanted his girls to be raised in a wholesome environment. And this was, I don't think AA is a cult at all. I just also can see where my dad would have felt so safe because of some similarities, which was, okay, so in AA you have a sponsor. Well, in the ICOC you have a discipler. There were like all of these different things that did correlate. Here's the thing though. The ICOC actually is a cult, and it's very, very dangerous, and it is not helping to better people. It is controlling people. In AA, you are making your own decisions.
Oh, right. They give you a set of tools called the 12 steps and the 12 traditions and the 12 principles, and you get a sponsor, and you can follow them if you want. You don't have to do the steps.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, you probably have heard this phrase. Give us 30 days, give us 6 months. And if you don't like it, you can leave and we'll be glad to refund your misery. That's what they say in AA, right? Have you probably heard that?
Well, the other thing you don't do in AA is if somebody does go out, you're not like, well, you're dead to me. And
no. Yeah,
if
no.
somebody does that, if somebody leaves, like the whole congregation turns their back on you.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so wrong.
No, in AA, if anything, if anybody goes out many times, depending on their support circle, they will go after them
Yeah.
and try to do an
Encourage them.
intervention or
Yeah.
come back, but they don't force you. They just, unlike a cult, although I don't think so like here, if you left a cult, they don't go after you and bring you back. You're gone, right?
No, they did sort of try with my parents, and they do with some people. So what's different for me is I was a teenager when they told my parents that I was not allowed to come back. But then my parents said, well, then we're not going to come back. Like, what are you talking about? This is our family. Because the whole thing was family. And so my parents ended up sort of deciding, well, I guess we're not going to be a part of this anymore because you won't let our daughter be a part of it. And then the church was like, well, then you're not allowed. That's like then they turn it around. They're like, then you're not allowed back. But they did send some leaders to try to convince my parents. But at this point, I was in an intensive 90-day treatment program for anorexia. Because, again, trigger warning. I know that you do that in the beginning, but
Yes.
Lots of trigger warnings. Because I did not know how to cope with all of the abuse that was going on. And over time, it morphed into, after, again, trigger warning, self-harm, after one suicide attempt, and after running away. Like, I tried so hard to not be a part of this and to free myself. But when none of that worked, and I just realized that I was stuck like this forever, they were going to choose a husband for me. I was just going to be probably some leader's wife. And I just gave up, and I just stopped. I kind of just stopped eating. I stopped taking care of myself. I just gave up.
So they have arranged marriages.
Yes, they would not tell you that, but absolutely they have arranged marriages.
How does that work? So you're 16, 17, 18, and what, do they introduce you to somebody, or they put you in a room together and like...
Never alone.
No,
Purity culture.
no.
So dating culture in the ICOC and the ICC is extremely intense. You, first of all, are expected to, if you're a female, you have to say yes to anyone who asks you on a date. You must go. But the caveat is that all dates are going to be a group date, or, you're never going to be alone with this person. But you have to say yes. When you do decide that you have what they call an interest in someone, and you tell your discipler or handler, then at that point, things start getting real weird. Because then they're like, okay, now you need to date every other brother or you need to date every other sister before we start considering making it official between you guys. It's super weird. And then when they maybe are ready to allow you guys to date, this is going to be something that you guys are never allowed to talk about. Like, the male and the female are never allowed to interact about the fact that they might start dating. All of it is going through their disciplers and leadership. Eventually, if leadership decides that these people would be good together, then they're going to tell the brother that he gets to ask the sister, and then the sister doesn't get to decide yes or no. She just has to say yes.
Wow.
And then they still only are allowed to date in public, basically. Like, you're never alone together. You're not allowed to text or talk on the phone after 8 p.m. There's a lot of rules when it comes to purity. And then eventually, but usually what will happen if you are interested in someone, you will not date that person. Usually they're going to tell you that person is not very spiritual. We want you to date this person. We've already decided this.
Forgive me for maybe being a little naive because I'm not a teenage girl, but I grew up with 3 sisters. So you're 16, your hormones are racing, and it's biologically natural for you to start, and with the males too, to start looking at the opposite sex. That's what we do during adolescence and puberty. That's when our hormones are racing through our body. Men are looking at women, women are looking at boys. So you were not allowed to, if you saw a man, a 16, 17-year-old boy, your age, you were not allowed to flirt with him or...
No.
No.
I was I mean, I was friends with them. I actually kind of learned the art of being friends with everybody in order to be able to hang out with my biggest crush. That's the only way that I could do it. And I never told a soul that I had a crush on him. I made sure, because I saw what happened when other people did. So I was very careful about that. But even those, even those interactions were there was always the hawk watching. It wasn't just the hawk, it was everybody told on each other. So you were always afraid that somebody's going to tell on you if you do anything wrong. And when it came to purity culture, it was very intense. The way that they treated all of us was really, I think, inappropriate. I don't know if you guys have gone into any of this, and I feel like it might be I don't know how appropriate it is, but like, are we allowed to talk about masturbation?
Sure.
Oh,
So when, like, we would be like forced into groups where we have to talk about whether we masturbated and what we thought about, and then they would tell us horrible things like, every time you do that, like, a kitten drowns, or like,
oh my God.
Yeah, they would tell us really, really horrific things, and also, not to mention that you're killing Jesus again, and it was really mortifying. And we were
well, I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, and we were told the same thing. If you masturbate, you're going to have hair growing on your palms. That wasn't a kitten dying, but if you're 14 years old and you're told that if you touch your penis, can you imagine me I don't want hair on my palms. So it was a deterrent, and it worked.
Yeah.
For a while, until I realized, after masturbating a few times, and go, oh, well, I don't have any hair in my palms.
No hair.
Okay.
The kitten dying thing's oddly specific. That's oddly specific.
That's very
so
disturbing.
Gross.
Very disturbing.
Yeah. I think that really stuck with me a lot, because I'm such an animal person, and I just was like mortified. Like,
yeah, of course.
So unfair that, like, that thing feels so good, and we were having all of these hormones, but that's what it causes. Like, I just was, it really messed me up.
Okay, Justine, we have about 10 minutes, and I have two questions that I think are important. One, if you can talk about it, where is the lawsuit right now? In what stage? And the second part is, tell us when you got out and how you're doing today.
All right, Cliff Notes version. Right now, the lawsuits, we have actually a hearing on Friday, where we're hopefully going to see how we're going to proceed. But right now we have, I want to say, 18 plaintiffs.
So it's a class action.
Mm-hmm. It's not a class action, actually. They're all individual. They're all individual, but we're filing for about 18. Now, that does not mean there are only 18 victims. It just is that there have been 18 people in California who are coming forward. We're going to continue filing lawsuits all across the country, and eventually overseas as well. But right now, you can find information on that at ICOC-ICC-lawsuits.com. You can read all of the lawsuits, but I will caution you that they are very disturbing. I've written a lot of these plaintiff statements myself, and I got shingles writing some of them, because it just is
stressful.
Really, it's horrifying.
Yeah.
But that being said, I do think that it's worth checking out. There's also all of the media so far is going to be on that lawsuit. So if you would just like to read an article about it, or a couple of articles, you can go there for that.
Are you aware of any documentaries in the works?
Oh, yes, in fact. So we got picked up by BBC.
Good.
And they are working on a docuseries right now.
That's going to help a lot.
Yes.
Wonderful.
I'm very excited about it.
Okay, so
how did I get out?
You mentioned you were born in 1990, I think. So we kind of know approximately 87. How old you are.
I was born in 87, but joined in 1990.
Okay, so we have so if you could do the math, folks, you can figure out how old she is. So about okay. I was trying to avoid. You never ask a lady what her age is. So yeah, tell us how you got out and how long that transition. Because I've heard Melody's story and everybody else's. Some people have like a very difficult transition period or a long one. Tell us about yours.
Well, I found out while I was in treatment for anorexia, and my dad had come in for a family session, and at this point, I had basically written out. Part of my work for that week was to write out what I had been through. My parents literally did not know how bad it was in the church for me and my sister, and I had written it all out. And my dad, and then I had to read it to my dad, and he said, and then my my therapist turns to him and says, "You can never go back to that church. Your daughter's life depends on it." And my dad said, "Well, actually, that's one of the things I wanted to tell Justine today, is that we won't be going back because we've been marked and disfellowshipped. And it's all because the church knew that I was going to be deprogrammed when I was in treatment. And I was there for 90 days. And I really was. We played a game where I would like ask to find out whether, like, I'd be like, is this normal or cult? Because I literally did not know what was normal in the world. It's like Kimmy Schmidt. Like, I just did not know what was normal. And they would help me. They'd be like, oh, no, that's cult. But for 90 days of having a bunch of peers and therapists telling me what was and wasn't normal, I came out and I went to all of my friends and I was like, we're in a cult.
So you went to therapy?
A 90-day residential treatment program.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. I was 16, but I've been in therapy forever. Therapy
can be lifelong. I'm still in therapy, and I started a long time ago. So, all right. So you're okay. So you told us you're 37 now. So you got out about 16.
Yeah.
So
about
give
20.
or take, you've been out 20 years. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Well, really fantastic, because finally all of the truth that I've been saying is finally landing, and people are seeing that I wasn't lying the whole time, and that's very validating. I'm really looking forward to seeing justice. I think I've sort of found my calling a little bit with supporting survivors. I had no idea that would be something that I would do. I really feel like when we used to talk about the church being your brothers and sisters, when I look at our survivors, they are like my little brothers and sisters. Most of them are a bit younger than me. And I really do feel like I've taken them under my wing in ways. And I think that the universe, as much as it has been rough, I am so grateful that we're here now. And I'm great. I've got 3 kids. I've got 3 dogs, which you've heard.
Yep.
I'm married. I've worked in a winery for the last 10 years. I get paid to write, which is my favorite thing in the world. And, you know, I think I'm not grateful for my experience, because little Justine should never have been through that. I really feel deeply about that. However, I am really grateful that I have turned all of that yuckiness into something really good.
By the way, when I asked Justine how she's doing today, and a big smile came across her face. So, and I have to tell you, and Melody can agree, can testify. Justine is very vibrant and she's smiling, and so she's doing very well. I have one final question, and it's probably because either I didn't follow the bouncing ball or I missed something along the way. So you went to AA for a while, and I know your dad was in there. You went to AA for...
I was just raised in AA. My mom has been in and out of sobriety. My dad has always...
Oh, so you're familiar with AA. Okay.
Super familiar. My dad runs rehabs and has my whole
life.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That's a culture I'm very...
So you're not in recovery?
I'm not in recovery, no.
Gotcha. Okay. See, that's where I didn't... Somewhere I lost the bouncing ball there. And I thought maybe you were. Because, and then you mentioned a winery... And I'm thinking, if she's in a winery, most alcoholics would not run a winery, but you're not an alcoholic.
Well, no, I just work there. But but you know what? My parents, my dad, who's, sober, he will still even pop by the winery to say hi, because it's local. It's a very safe place. It's a great place for me. But that for me, it was really the eating stuff that I had to.
Yeah. Okay, Melody, you had a question?
I did have one question. I also wanted to know how your dad is doing, and is he dealing with a lot of residual and guilt about this, or has he come to, have you guys eased that for him? How is he doing with all of this?
I think that a lot of that is a question for him.
Right.
But what I can say is that my dad doesn't talk about it much. It's a hard thing to talk about because of all of the good things for him, the ways that it worked that were really good for him.
Right.
And I imagine that he has a lot of feelings. That being said, he's very extremely supportive of what I'm doing. The only
Good.
thing that he and my stepmom expressed has been that they worry about me because I can take on other people's energy, and they just worry that I take on too much. But they know that this is the right thing to do, and our family's very, very close.
Okay. Justine, I can't thank you. We can't thank you enough for joining
sure.
us. Your story is a very positive one and very inspiring, and you have a very vibrant, happy glow to you. So
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on and sharing your story. So we'll talk to you soon, and we'll send Melody all those links and the lawsuit website so we can put everything in the show notes. Okay.
Keep us posted on that lawsuit. We want to know how that turns out for sure. So best of luck to you and everyone else involved in that. And we just hope that goes well for the whole group. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate this time.
Yep. Bye-bye. We want to thank Justine so much for coming on the show. We wish her and all of the people involved in these lawsuits that are going on the best of luck with this, and hope that this goes well for everyone involved. And she did send me, because this episode was recorded quite a few weeks back, but Justine had reached out to me and sent me an update. But before I read that update, I'm going to let Andrew put in his commentary here at the outro, and then I will kind of close it with those statistics that she sent me of reports of abuse within this group.
Okay, so I just finished editing the episode, and there's a little secret between all the episodes that I record. I can't always remember, like Melody just said, we interviewed her a couple of weeks ago. So when it comes time to doing like a commentary on the episode, I don't always remember what the guest talked about. But I just finished editing this episode, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. I thought Justine was a great guest. She really was very, like, the part that caught me off guard, I forgot about this, was halfway through, she says to us, "Is it okay if we talk about masturbation?" And I was like, I don't know if you remember that, because apparently the elders or
wasn't it the kittens dying? Is that her episode?
Yes, yes.
Oh my God!
They're taught that if you masturbate, the kittens will be dying, and I went off on a tangent about.
It was weird.
It was very strange, and I didn't see that coming, and it kind of caught me off guard. And then I forgot about it, and I got hit with it again during the editing. So, but and I spoke about when I grew up how the Roman Catholics teach you the same thing, but instead of kittens dying, we grow hair in our palm, whatever. But all kidding aside, I thought Justine did a great job going into detail exactly what this cult is. I am really happy that they have a lawsuit going.
Yeah.
This is the purpose of bringing awareness to these cults and getting justice. And of course, it's Justine for Justice is what her name is. So I don't have too much to say about that, other than I just think she did a great job.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Andrew. It's super articulate. And if you want to see more of Justine, or if you are somehow a victim of the ICC or the ICOC, you can find Justine on TikTok and Instagram, and I'm sure she will be happy to connect you with the right people if you need to get involved in some of these lawsuits that are going on. And I'm going to read off this tally that she told me, and she said it's about a 50-50 split between the reports of the ICOC and the ICC. Now, mind you, the one is, I believe the ICC was the splinter group, if I remember correctly, which basically is just offshoot of the same cult. And so they're about 50-50 in these reports, and this is the tally. Reports of sexual abuse, 773. Reports of physical abuse, 213. Reports of financial fraud and abuse, 536. Reports of suicides, 27. Child sex trafficking, 18. And in parentheses behind that is written, yes, this is true and proven. Homophobic related deaths, 3. Severe psychological mental abuse, 710. Brutal slander and defamation, 99. Labor trafficking and illegal firing, 102. The total of these abuse charges tallying up to 2,081 counts. Now, mind you, this has been going on for decades, so I'm sure this is just scratching the surface, because this is just the people that are coming forward. I'm sure there is a large number of people who haven't come forward or are too afraid to come forward.
Yeah. Some people know this on my other podcast. I'm looking into going after the scammers, the ones who call you and try to scam you out of money. And there's people who get scammed out of money, and people are, when something bad happens to them and it's embarrassing, like losing money or what they're afraid to come forward. So I give Justine and all of the plaintiffs that are coming forward to testify, kudos, man.
Yes, exactly.
It's great. It's great.
And so you can find her on social media, and I'm sure she will, again, help you connect you with the right people. If you're one of those people out there that would like to come forward and maybe you didn't know about this. So we once again want to thank Justine so much for coming on the show, for sharing all of this vital information. And we want to thank all of you for tuning into Cultimatum. Your support, as always, is greatly appreciated. If you could please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on platforms such as Apple and Spotify. And I'm just going to add in here that we did notice that you can now actually also leave comments on the episodes on Spotify. So you cannot give us a written review on Spotify like you can on Apple, but you can leave comments on the individual episodes. So please give us a review on Apple and comment on the episodes on Spotify if you are listening on Spotify. And if you could also follow, share, and keep listening to all of our latest episodes.
And I'm going to reiterate that we have 3 comments, 3 reviews on Apple Podcasts, but they were probably done in another country because we can't read them. But we do have 3 reviews, and we have a 5.0 rating, which is great. But there's plenty of people listening in America, so Apple separates the country. So if you leave a review in Canada, we don't get to see it, and nor do you, the regular audience. So we're really imploring you, if you're on our Facebook group or you're listening, please, we those reviews and that rating help us get ranked up in the Apple Podcast world. And yes, Spotify has now allowed you to leave comments on each episode. So you can also show your support by joining our Facebook group under the name Cultimatum Podcast. Just go on there, click you want to join, and Melody or I will let you in.
And I'm just going to add another little thing here too. Whoever those 3 people are that did rate us on Apple, thank you very much. Even if you're in another country, we appreciate it. We love the 5 stars, so we appreciate all of the support we are getting out there. And you can also find us on additional social media platforms, including Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, and YouTube.
If you have a cult or human trafficking experience and you'd like to share with us, please feel free to contact us at cultimatumpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, any of our social media, other platforms, just reach out to us.
Yes. And ex-cult members looking for any additional support can also consider joining the Cult Escape and Recovery group on Facebook.
And if you're interested in hearing more from me, you can find me on my other podcast, Anonymous Andrew, Life and the Choices We Make. And I am in my season number 3, and we're off and running. Also, I think we can make the announcement now that Melody and I are working on not only an episode about what actually a cult is, but we're also going to start I guess, doing commentary on the documentaries that we're coming across. So stay tuned for that. We're going to start mixing up our episodes a little bit. So,
and we might do some overlapping, but part of this is to also cover cults that maybe we don't have guests for, as to just keep the knowledge and the information and the awareness out there, because there's not, and some of these cults have dissolved, and or there's just not people that are willing to come forward and talk about them. So we want to keep the knowledge and the information out there on these other cults that have existed in the past or present. So
if Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu and if all the streaming services are producing documentaries, that means they're relevant. It would be remiss of us for not to recognize them, watch them, and do a commentary.
Yes, and keep the audience informed. That's good, Andrew. You were close. So, and as always, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, you're not alone.
All right. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Yes.